All right, so as we're pounding out these letters, it's probably good for you guys to know why we're doing what we're doing. Fred Shuttlesworth is a Baptist pastor. In the middle of the Civil Rights War, he is buddies with Martin Luther King. And Fred Shuttlesworth wants to have a civil rights march in Birmingham, Alabama. And he goes and applies for a permit to have his march. And if you were a black man in Birmingham, Alabama in the 60s, you're not getting a permit to have a march. And so Birmingham, Alabama doesn't issue the permit. And he goes to the permitting office and tries to get it, and they give him the runaround. And so after he realizes that they're not going to issue the permit, he goes ahead and has his march anyway. And of course, they arrest him, and he loses in court because he didn't have a permit. And this thing goes all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court, and Fred Shuttlesworth is found guilty in Alabama Supreme Court, and it goes to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court reverses the decision. And so when the United States Supreme Court reverses the decision, they say several very, very interesting things. So the first thing they say is what we're calling the Shuttlesworth Rule, which is Note 9 in Bruin. Note 9 in Bruin reads, only narrow, objective, and definite standards guiding licensing officials. Okay, that's a short clip. What that means is, to us, the 60-day rule from 2C 58-4 is now set in stone. It was set in stone in 1924. It was the due process guarantee that if you applied for a permit, the chief just couldn't blow you off. You would have that automatic approval after 60 days. Well, New Jersey did a workaround on that, and I found out the hard way in my 2010 appeals case. Not that I asked for an auto approval, just that I pointed out that it took 2 years for the chief to deny the permit. And they came back and said there's no way the legislature would want, in items as dangerous as firearms, would want an automatic approval after 60 days if the chief dropped the ball. And that's clearly not the case that's happening here. The chiefs aren't dropping the ball. They're just not processing the permit, which is exactly what's happening at the court. And so what the Shuttlesworth Rule is doing for us is that setting that 60-day statutory limit in stone. No longer can these police chiefs say, oh, well, the court said we could take as much time as we want. As of Bruin, they have 60 days to process the permit. And quite frankly, let's be honest, that 60 days is ridiculous. That 60 days is a 1924 law. There was no email. There were no electric fingerprints. As a matter of fact, there were no fingerprints. When they did your reference checks, they either did it with the U.S. mail or the flatfoot went door to door and asked your references. That's why they had 60 days. But in 1924, they didn't even have fingerprints, and there was no such thing in 24 as an FBI, and there was no such thing as an SBI. So the investigation was different. Now, let's backtrack to 1933. 1933, there's the Fred Fort Bill. And the Fred Fort Bill is a direct result of the Waxy Gordon scandal with the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office and Jonas Tooman, the prosecutor, and his lead detective, Harry B. Crook. So that's all on the Gun for Hire show. Fred Fort was upset that the prosecutor's office circumvented the chief approval judge issuance and put the Fred Fort bill, put fingerprints in there, which was cutting edge in 1933, and then put the SBI FBI check, which was also cutting edge. The FBI, I think the exact date the FBI was started was in 33. And so that was cutting edge at the time. But now that you guys have an SBI number, and now that you have your fingerprints like from Identico online, they know immediately whether you're a criminal or not. They don't need references anymore. That's antiquated crap. And quite frankly, in 1966, Sills said, we're going to issue permits the same way we issued them before, which meant the 1924 law. Well, you didn't have to have an FID card in 24. So if you were, let's say, my age, 55 years old, and you had 30 handguns in 1966, you didn't need to go get an FID card or be fingerprinted. But if you wanted to carry, you did. So if you wanted to carry your handguns, you had to go get the carry permit, but you didn't need an FID card on those previously purchased pre-1966 handguns. And so what the government doesn't understand is the reason that we have the 3 reference checks and the fingerprints and the background check in 2C58-4 is because originally in 24 and then again in 66, you didn't have to have the FID card to get the carry permit. That didn't change until 1978 when they recodified 2A15144 into 2C58-4 and 2A15133 into 2C58-3. Why is that all important? Because now Directive 0619's 30-day guideline is set in stone, okay? And so let me just, if you get me your information, and I pounded out a bunch of these letters again today, okay? The first guy you're going to mail it to is your county judge, all right? That's a no-brainer. You're going to mail it to your county judge certified, okay? We want a record. You want a record with a barcode of your judge getting that letter. This way they can't blow you off like they blow you off with these phone calls or these email. Ignore your emails, okay? That letter was delivered. When you get down to your signature page on the last page, the next guy you're going to email it to is Glenn A. Grant. Glenn A. Grant is the head of the administrative office of the courts. Glenn A. Grant is the guy who wrote Directive 0619, so he's important to get copied on this letter because it's important that Glenn A. Grant knows that no one's adhering to this 30-day rule, okay? It's also important that your judge knows that Glenn A. Grant got this letter, and Glenn A. Grant knows your judge knows that. The next person on the list is Stuart Rabner. Stuart Rabner is the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court. You're copying Stuart Rabner because Glenn A. Grant only works for Stuart Rabner. And so if Glenn A. Grant wrote Directive 0619, Glenn A. Grant wrote Directive 0619 because Stuart Rabner told him to. All right, so after Carlstrom, they had some problems, and the problems with the Carlstrom not getting the court hearing is a due process issue. It's actually not constitutional. And so by telling Grant to write Directive 0619 and putting those guidelines in there, 14 days on the prosecutor, 30 days total to issue the permit, have a standing numbering convention. By doing that, he was ensuring that the constitutionality of the law because it now had due process protections. Grant and Rabner are very sharp guys. Like, you don't get to that position because you're not a sharp guy, right? And they know exactly what Bruin says. They know what the Shuttlesworth rule is. They know what note number 9 is. They know what definite guidelines guiding, definite standards guiding licensing officials is. They know that. And so regardless of how they feel about guns or issuing gun permits, they also know that if a bunch of us sue them in District Court D, they're not going to win this in federal court. There's just no way. There's no way a judge can go around this language. The next guy you're gonna mail your letter to is going to be me, because the Supreme Court case, I haven't even got my order yet or my permit. because of the Supreme Court case docket number, we want them to know that I have it. You're then going to mail it to David Jensen, and they've already looked David Jensen up. They know that David Jensen was my lawyer in 087269, but then they know he was Cheeseman's lawyer in 1927, and they know he ran the Drake case, and they know he ran the Gould case, and so they know who he is. And then by sending these letters to Jensen, when the next case comes around and he needs plaintiffs, he's got a box full of these letters, and he's got all of these guys that are previously at 73 days, 93 days, 86 days, and he can pick through them and decide which of those guys from which county he wants to represent the next case that they have going. And that's why we're doing it. He's probably not going to open these letters until he needs plaintiffs. And then the last person that you're going to copy is going to be Anthony Calandro from Gun for Hire. And Anthony, again, he's not going to open your letter. He's not reading it because they're all the same, basically. And he's not going to talk about you or your problem or your delay or your address or whatever on the air. But we want Anthony's name to be on there copied because we want the judges to know that we're sharing information. One of the reasons that they got over on us so bad in 1968 till, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, let's say, till the Cheeseman case, was because they had pulled the wool of the Sicardi rule over our eyes. They hid this internal policy, which really wasn't an internal policy. It's more of a memo. I would liken it to a fax, but they didn't have faxes back then. So I think for your older guys who had like a ditto machine when you were in school, imagine a letter written in 1968 run through a ditto machine 21 times and then mailed to the county assignment judges. That's how bad this thing was. It was a memo. But we don't have New Jersey Firearms Owners Syndicate. We don't have Gun for Hire Radio. We don't have a CNJFO. We don't have an ANGRPC. We don't have any way to share information back then. Now, through all of these other avenues, you guys all know what the Shuttlesworth rule is. You guys all know what note number 9 is. And so that's scary to those guys at the court because now we are educated, civically minded gun owners who aren't going to take the nonsense that we put up with from December of 1968 to the Sicardi rule, through Priest in 1990, and then through Wheeler, and another big one in there was Berinsky, was a big problem for us too. That's all garbage now, and so this Shuttlesworth rule is scary for them because the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas is saying, you have to issue, and you have to issue in a timely fashion. They actually in Shuttlesworth use expedited fashion. That's a phrase. I think there's something interesting else interesting about Shuttlesworth. On page 164 in Shuttlesworth, it says, all that can be expected from the plaintiff is that he made a good faith attempt to apply for the permit. And because the city officials in Birmingham didn't issue the permit, he doesn't have to forego exercising his constitutional rights. He applied for the permit. I would go read that. And I think that's scary for the New Jersey courts because what that says is Fred Shuttlesworth applied for a permit. Birmingham, Alabama wouldn't give it to him. Fred Shuttlesworth held his march anyway. They arrested him, and he got off. Translate that into 2C58-4. You have your FID card, because it's the law after 1978 that you have to have an ID card to get a carry permit. So you have your FID card, which means you've already got the fingerprints. You've already done the background check. You already have the SBI number. You've already been vetted. Then you get the SBI 212A form and you buy your next handgun or your carry gun or your second or third or fourth, it doesn't matter which, handgun. you've done the background check again, right? So you've been actually vetted twice because you can't qualify for the 2C58-4 permit unless you have the 2C58-3 permit to purchase. I mean, there's some rare circumstances, but they're very rare. And by the way, the guns that fly under that banner aren't guns anybody wants to carry anyway. So if you're carrying a modern gun that's 5 years old or newer, obviously you had to buy it with the 2C58-3A permit to purchase a handgun. And so by that, technically, the way I'm reading Bruin, you've already qualified under the 43 other state comparison in Bruin. Just as Thomas said, the 43 other shell issue states, you have to have fingerprints, you have to have background check, you have to have a mental health check, and qualifications, I think was in there, right? But we've already done all that. And so, really, if you look at the laws of the 43 states that were the shell issue states that we used as a comparison, none of them had an FID card. And so New Jersey wants to discuss like their law being presumptively lawful, but let's not forget, the FID card didn't exist until 1968. Well, that was, I'm sorry, 1966. That was a long time ago, 1966. I wasn't even born yet. I was the next year, but I wasn't born in 66. But that's not at the time of the founding. That's not between 1776 and 1793. So you show me one law at the time of the founding that the founders had to have an FID card or similar, right? And so then show me a law where on top of that they had to have a permit to purchase their I don't know what they call the flintlock musket handgun, and then they needed a permit to carry it. No founders had any of those. So as you start to read Bruin, go back and read Burton, because every single thing in Burton has been overturned since Heller, since McDonald, since Catano, since Bruin. There's nothing in Burton that upholds New Jersey's gun control law that is still good law. Not one part of it. So it's very interesting on, is the gun 2C58-4 permit actually legal anyway? Now, Bruin said it is, but I don't think that court case took into consideration with its 43 other state comparison that we've already done all of those background checks and fingerprints and everything else. And then the question becomes, right, if New Jersey can fingerprint you and background check you on your carry permit, and then 2 years later on your carry permit again, and then SBI 2128 check you when you buy a handgun, and they've already checked you on your FID card, like what's stopping them from doing a background check every week? What's stopping them on having a state police NICS check every time you go to the range? What's stopping them from setting up a truck in the parking lot of the range that you have to go there every time you go to shoot your guns? What's stopping them from doing it once a week? What's stopping them from doing it, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? What's stopping them from doing it 7 days a week? Nothing. So there is a line, and the line that Sill sold us in 66 was they needed a set of fingerprints and a background check. We've already got all that. So I think the Shuttlesworth rule was more important than we know right now. But it's important that we start laying bricks. Each one of these letters is a brick, right? Oxley might not care about one letter, but when he's got 300 on his desk, he's going to get a call from Grant or Rabner.